In the meantime, something very important in my life took place, and it's quite a story which I'll begin to tell you now. It was a Sunday afternoon. Uh, Most of the guests had left, and I was in the office, and two men came up and to the desk and asked if they could speak to the manager or the owner, and I said, "That's me." And they said, "We're interested in this property. Do you mind if we take a look at the hotel and the grounds?" I said, "No, I don't mind at all. Uh, do you want somebody to show you around?" They said, "No, we'll just walk around and look, and when we finish, we'll come back and talk to you." I said, "Okay, why don't you do that, and I'll wait, and then maybe we can go down to the bar and have a drink and discuss what you've seen." And they said, "Fine." So I was kind of amazed at this, surprised, and I wondered exactly what it was all about. They left and came back in about an hour and a half or so, and we went down to the bar, and I poured some drinks to what they wanted, and I said, "So what's this all about?" And their answer was that Mr. Araneta is one of the gentlemen is interested in buying some land in this neighborhood, and I am Mr. Ellerman of Pease and Ellerman, real estate broker in New York City. We have a kind of large business, and we're interested in this property. Can you tell us something about it? So I said, "Well, it's a hotel that's been here for many years. I've been improving it, and business is pretty good. And it's situated on 22 acres of land with about 700 or 800 feet on Lake Mahopac, and about 1,500 feet on Kirk Lake." And they said, "Well, thank you very much. We'll be in touch." I said, "Okay, bye." And they left, and I was kind of surprised. I didn't know what this could be about, and didn't think too much about it, not knowing what their interest was. The next morning, Monday morning, I got a call from Mr. Ellerman of Pease and Ellerman, and he said that Mr. Araneta is interested in your property, and he'd like to see you tomorrow in his office in New York. And I said, "Let's wait a minute, because tomorrow I have arranged to drive up to Ithaca, where I am meeting my son and his wife, and we have this arranged. I don't know if I could make it to see Mr. Araneta tomorrow. So he said, well, I think you ought to reconsider because Mr. Araneta is interested in buying your hotel, and it it would be an all-cash deal, no mortgages involved. I think you ought to talk to him about it. I said, well, give me his name again. And he said, well, his full name is Amado Araneta. He's a Filipino. And I said, where does he bank? And they said, Mr. Elliman said he banks at Chase Manhattan in New York. I said, well, I'll get back to you. What's your phone number? I got to check on something, and then I'll call you in about tomorrow. I'll call you in an hour. Okay, we said goodbye, and my idea was that I'd go to the bank and find out if they could check on Amado Araneta of Chase Manhattan, and before I go to talk to him, I want to know what kind of person this is. So I went to the bank, and I spoke to the vice president and told him that I have possible dealings with Amado Araneta, and he banks in Chase Manhattan, and I'd like to know about his credit rating. He says, okay, I can find out for you. So he called Chase Manhattan and asked to speak to one of the managers there, told him he was the vice president of the Mopac National Bank, and he got somebody on the phone, and he told him, I have a client here who has a possible deal going with Amado Araneta, who says he banks it with you, and I'd like to know what his credit rating was. So he said, okay, let me find out. And he checked for a minute or two, and then came back and said something, and my banker kind of smiled and said, thank you very much. And he then told me he has a pretty good credit rating. They told me that it's $500 million. I said, what? He said, $500 million. I said, wow, that's kind of interesting. I think I'm going to go talk to him tomorrow. So I thanked him, and we left, and I went back to the hotel and called Mr. Elliman and said, when does he want to meet? He said, around, can you make it by 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon? I said, make it to where? Well, his office is at, and he gave me the number and address of of where his office was. And I said, okay, I'll be there. Oh, he said, would you bring any drawings you have of the property and and also your returns, your federal returns for last year, so we can see what kind of business you've been doing. I said, yes, I can do that, and hung up and I kind of looked forward to the next day and called. We had to call Bob that evening to tell him that what was going on, and we didn't know what time we would make it up to Ithaca. Well, Tuesday arrived, and Babe and I packed some clothing because we were going to drive up to Ithaca and we were going to stay a couple of days. There was a new baby that Bob and Chan had that we were going to see for the first time. We were kind of excited about that. And, of course, we were excited about this meeting with Amado Araneta. We drove to the city. It took us our usual hour and 5 minutes. And we drove up to the address of his office. And Babe said she would take the car and she'd park it and go about her business, which was probably the jewelry business, or go to a museum. And that she would call me. I don't remember whether we had cell phones then. But some way we arranged that she should call me at Araneta's office to find out what was happening. I said, okay. And so I marched into his office, and looked like a very substantial place, and Mr. Elliman was there, and Mr. Araneta, and he said he was interested in my property. It was very attractive, and he wanted to look at my annual income from my tax report and look at the drawings that I had brought of the hotel property. So he looked rather cursorily about at the material I had brought, and then he asked me if I was interested in selling a hotel, and if so, what would I want for, what was my asking price? I told him that I had thought about it, and I gave him a price, and he said, that's kind of high considering your income was only slightly positive last year. And I said, well, we have a lot of expenses because I'm changing the rooms from semi-private or adjoining baths to private baths, and I'm spending money fixing up the place. But I have a mortgage, and and I have some debts, and there is no way that I would sell the hotel for less than that amount of money. So he said, well, I don't think we can negotiate like this face to face. Why don't you go into another room with Mr. Ellerman, and he can act as a go-between in our negotiations. I said, okay. But now I recall that he had said, I'm not willing to pay that much for this property, but we continue. Would you like to come up to my club? I'd like to show you where I spend my time. And we'll talk there. So we left his office, and he had a chauffeur drive us to his club. And when we got there, he showed me around, and we ordered a drink. And then he came up with that idea of the go-between, a shuttle diplomacy kind of thing. Evidently, he had used that before. To me, it was completely a new idea. But I had set in my mind the minimum that I would take to sell the place, and I had given him a higher price, so I had room to maneuver. So he stayed at the near the bar in his club, and Mr. Ellerman and I went to another room, and he said to me, you know, this is an unusual deal. There are not many places, any hotels like yours, resort hotels, that are sold without a mortgage. Usually they want to pay you very little in cash and take the rest back as a mortgage, and too often they're irresponsible, and they ruin the place because they haven't put up much money, and they run it for the short run to make as much as they can. Mr. Araneta is a different kind of buyer. When he buys, he pays cash, and you don't have to worry about a mortgage. That should be worth something to you, so can you see about lowering your price a little? Well, I had been prepared to lower my price, so I lowered it a small amount, and he left me and went back to talk to Mr. Araneta. In a short while, he was back, and Mr. Araneta said, that price is still too high. I'm not interested. You'll have to do better. And I then said, well, the best price, or the least amount of money that I would sell this for is X amount. And I guess I don't want to waste my time, because my wife has got the car and she expects to meet me soon, and we're going to drive up to Ithaca. But that's the best I could do. And don't forget that the price I'm giving you, I presume that I have to pay a fee to you as the real estate agent for making the sale. So I'm deducting that amount and figuring how much money I'll have left. So he went back to Mr. Araneta, and they discussed it, and he said, Mr. Araneta is close to your figure, and he said that he would share the real estate fee that you would have to pay. He'll pay half and you'll pay half. That was a considerable amount, and I said, okay, we have a deal. And he went back to tell Mr. Araneta that we had a deal. They called me in and we shook hands. I, of course, indicated in our acceptance, or my acceptance, the fact that he would be paying half of the real estate fee, and he said, yes, that's true. Because I only heard that from the real estate agent. I wanted to get it from Araneta. In our talks during the negotiations, Mr. Araneta had told me that he was a important person in the Philippines, that he owned the stadium where the Thriller in Manila was held. And that impressed me a lot, because that fight had only occurred a year or two before that. So that was a pretty famous incident. At any rate, I felt we had consummated a deal, and I called Babe and said, we're finished here, you can come and pick me up. Babe came and picked me up around 5 o'clock, and I told her, congratulations, we sold the hotel. She said, what do you mean? I said, well, I got a reasonable amount for it, and what I've sold is the hotel and the 4 acres that it sits on, and the approximate 6 acres across the road where we have the septic tanks and fields, because you can't separate those from the hotel. But we're keeping our house, and we're keeping the lots that we've subdivided, so that will be additional income for us. And I'm frankly feel like a load has been taken off my head when I consider that I won't have to worry about the septic tanks and fields, the water supply, getting guests, getting new business. I think that we should be able to live off this money for the rest of our lives. So, congratulations. So we kissed and we said hooray, and we started our trip up to Ithaca. But in the meantime, we were both hungry, so we went to a Japanese restaurant that was situated across the Hudson River that we had heard about or had been there before, and we were going to have a celebratory dinner before we drove up to Ithaca. We called Bob and let him know that we had sold the hotel, got a pretty good price, and we're very happy to be driving up to Ithaca. So that was, we were pretty happy driving up, and happy to tell Bob and Jan about what had happened, and waited until the next day to call our lawyers, Gubman and Shapiro, and tell them about the sale and arrange for them to draw up a contract. And we told them who we had sold it to, and that it was going to be an all-cash deal, and they said, sounds pretty good to them. They said they would draw up a contract in a couple of weeks or a month, and that we could then get in touch with Araneta and his office and his lawyer to come in and sign the contracts. They asked me about the commission involved, and I told him that the seller, that's me, was only going to pay half of the commission. I think the total commission involved $50,000, and I was going to pay $25,000, and the buyer had agreed to pay the other $25,000. I said, that's a little unusual, but we can write that in the contract. I said, well, you go ahead, because as far as I'm concerned, that's the deal. I told him about our keeping the lots in my house, and that should be made into, drawn into part of the sales agreement. And we had a day or two up in Ithaca. We enjoyed it thoroughly. We were happy as pigs in shit, and drove back the next day. And we didn't say a word to anybody at the hotel, waiting until the contract could be drawn up and signed, and the sale become fait accompli. I think it took about 6 weeks before we had a date to sign the contract, and we called Mr. Ellerman and Amado Araneta, and arranged for Mr. Ellerman to have the authority to sign the contracts for Mr. Araneta, who wasn't going to be at the closing. The big day came, and my lawyers were there. Mr. Ellerman was there, and he was acting as the lawyer for Mr. Araneta, and my lawyer, Mr. Shapiro, started to read the contract, and when he finished, Mr. Ellerman said, you didn't mention my fee. And we were told that Mr. Norman was responsible for half the fee, which was $25,000, and will you sign that that's all he owes you? And he said, yes, of course. So we had paid him the check, and he had signed that's all he expected. And then we called Mr. Araneta to get his okay about the contract, and Mr. Araneta said, well, everything is all right except I'm not paying him $25,000. So Mr. Ellerman said, well, he couldn't sign the contract under those conditions, and the contract talks fell apart for that $25,000. The next day, I got a call from Mr. Araneta, who said, I understand the deal didn't go through because of Mr. Ellerman said that I owe him $25,000. I don't see why that should bother you. I can either pay him or not pay him, but we could sign the deal without that. I do enough business with him that he can forgive this $25,000 if you want to go ahead with the contract. However, there's one thing that I am concerned about. We never really discussed your house going with the hotel. I assumed that that was part of the deal. Otherwise, I can't pay you that full amount, because I assumed that your house was part of the deal, and I would say your house is worth $50,000. I said, what do you mean you can't? It was very clear when we spoke that I wasn't selling my house. I was selling the hotel and its properties, but I was keeping the house. He said, well, do you want the deal or don't you? And I thought about it and realized that the land, the lots were probably worth about $150,000 or $200,000, and if I got $50,000 less on the sale, I still wanted the deal, so I agreed to it. So he chiseled me out of $50,000, but I was still satisfied, and called Shapiro and told him about what we had agreed to. And since we had a signed statement from Pease and Ellerman that all that I had to pay with them was $25,000, and I didn't owe them any more fee for the sale, we wrote up the new contract that way. And I don't remember whether it was Ellerman or a lawyer for Araneta who came to sign the contract that was finally agreed upon. One thing I learned when you're dealing with rich people, a handshake doesn't mean shit until the contract is signed. But I was still okay with it, and it was finally signed, and we got a check for the amount that Araneta owed me for the hotel. To clarify the sale of my house, which I may not have done in my previous talk, I had drawn up an official survey of my house and the property it stood on, and it was very clear in the contract that was drawn and that we finally signed that I got the house, I kept the house and the land that it stood on, and the right to use the driveway to get to Westlake Boulevard. So that was pretty clear, and definitely was part of the contract that was finally signed. Part of our negotiations and the contract was that I would stay on as manager at a salary of $15,000 per year, and I did that because I wanted Irwin and his staff to continue running the kitchen and the dining room, and to take care of some of the guests who expected some continuation of the former Forest House. We had a wedding arranged for. We had GE coming for some of their Sunday to Friday meetings, and other things going on that I felt I wanted to be there for, and if there was going to be some change in management after me, that I at least give the new person some idea about the clientele that we were expecting for the summer, and how to handle the arrangements for the wedding and for General Electric running seminar. I also hadn't taken any vacation for that year, and it was January or past January, and I told them that I normally took a 3-week vacation at this time, so I was going to do it. And Babe and I thought that we would go to St. Thomas again. We loved the island, and we would take our 3 weeks there. They had built a new hotel, quite large, very modern, about 15 stories up on the hill, and we took a room there, and because we liked the beach so much, and we thought it would be more comfortable to have a room at the beach motel, which only cost us about $18 a week, whereas the hotel, no, I guess it cost, no, $18 a day. And we were paying $75 a day for the room in the hotel, but this meant that we didn't have to go down to the beach, which was quite a trip with 2 elevators, and get wet and not have a place to dry or shower, and to go back up to the hotel and seeing as we were newly rich and could afford that, we took a room in the hotel and the room on the beach, and looked forward to 3 weeks in St. Thomas.